Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I will be your moderator for today's last panel discussion, and I'll not waste any more time. I'll call upon my panel members all at once, and in no particular order. I'll start with Ms. Kauna Ndilula, Executive Director, Business Financial Solutions.
Ratios need to be announced in due time, but we do see the possibility of from our side at least, of LNG at Elizabeth Bay, and that will take the country in a certain direction. And then the last one, which hasn't been touched on at all at this conference, pretty much, is what the country does next in terms of its own infrastructure. For example, do you have LNG imports at Walvis Bay? Do you connect Namibia to Central Southern Africa, Zambia, DRC, and so on? This is especially important if one is to unlock critical minerals in the energy transition. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thanks for touching on the Namibia specifics. My next question is to Esther. We've heard a number of times over the past few days about the importance of regional and specifically Pan-African collaboration. And my question to you is, what role will other banks on the continent play in the offshore oil and gas developments in Namibia?
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. There is a lot of opportunity for banks and DFIs to play in terms of the development of the Namibian oil and gas sector, specifically the provision of equity for the sector. We're looking at this. Most of the exploration work will need equity financing. So there is a role for DFIs such as the AFC that provide equity to play. We also have a fund for export development that also provides equity. So this is one of the roles that banks can play. We also look at the project financing required, that is for the rigs, for some of the equipment that will be required for the oil offshore. So this is also an area where banks can play very much. We are also looking at issues like bond issuance to raise the amount of capital required for such projects, given that when you look at projects of this nature, they require huge capital outlay. So bond issuance through advisory services as well, we are also required for such projects. We also look at reserve bank lending and asset bank lending, which really is linked to the reserves, which will also be required as part of the interventions that financial institutions can offer, including project preparation. I know my former colleague spoke a lot about project preparation, but there are some projects which are still concept stage or which still require a bit of more work in terms of getting them to feasibility stage. So they will also require project preparation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther. Fabian, in the context of what Esther has mentioned, we have also heard in previous sessions that it is difficult to raise capital for oil and gas on the continent for various reasons. And so when we think about an enabling environment, whether we're talking about the social environment, political, regulatory, etc., what are the keys to attracting capital to develop Namibia's vast energy resources? What do we need to get right?
Yeah, thank you, Ruusa. I think I'm going to sort of reply to you in the following manner. I think the starting point is actually what we need to remember is that we're not just competing for capital today. We should have a longer time horizon. So it's not just about today, it's the next 10, 15 years. That's what we're talking about. So given that context, I think the very, very first thing that we need to do is we need to have a longer term outlook. And once you're taking a longer term outlook, you do need some fiscal stability in terms of policy and so forth. And when I mean fiscal stability, I by no means, I know there'll be one or two people who might raise their eyebrows, I by no means referring to stabilization clauses or anything like that. It's just we need to be very, very certain on our positions. I think investors are very, very wary when it's not certain. I think the third point around that is and it's actually it's almost a irony that I have to bring this up. It's about velocity. I mean, I kind of can't help to note we're probably about an hour and a half over our program, but it's important to have velocity. We need to execute swiftly. I don't think we've got all the time. And then the last point from my side, I think it's we need to have a sort of systems approach to this. Somebody mentioned development of infrastructure. In this example, I think there's lots of synergies between oil and gas and green hydrogen. We should not lose part of that picture. If we combine, I think, all those factors together, we should be able to attract.
Ms. Kauna, a recurring theme from almost all the sessions we've had yesterday and today is around local content. I think it's been mentioned in every single session. And I think we can all agree by now that local content is a must, and that funding for local content is key not only to developing local content policy, but also giving effect to the policy. With that being said, my question is twofold. Firstly, what has been our experience in Namibia in terms of funding local content? And secondly, what should we be looking at as we craft this local content policy for the oil and gas sector? And what specific considerations should we speak to when we're thinking about financiers in the oil and gas industry or the value chain?
I think what's important to note is that as we craft this opportunity, a number of people have actually pointed out that Namibia has a unique positioning in the sense that we're not really at the same disadvantage that many African countries have been when they crafted in terms of our policy environment, in terms of our education, in skills in the particular sector, and also in terms of infrastructure. So we've got a small base to start from, but we've got a good base to start from. So as we craft this local content and identify the strategies that will make the right impact, what our objective should be in developing a sustainable pool of entrepreneurs that have long-term and longevity in how they run their businesses. So ours should not be a focus of short-term gain, but a focus of making sure that the entrepreneurs that get supported are sustainably taken through a value chain and increase of business opportunity that really establish them long-term. And I would like to reference to some of the work we've done as BFS. In the mining sector, for example, and many actually sectors in the country, we've created over the past 15 years a business case for funding local content and creating entrepreneurs that are not just delivering finished goods and services, but actually creating value in production capacity and becoming sector champions in the specific sectors they make. And I believe we can do it also in the oil and gas industry. If you look at the mining sector in Namibia and you look at the educational base of the managers across the mining sector, you'll see a number of CEOs at mines, mining managers, finance, procurement, in all disciplines to run a proper mine, actually fully drawn from Namibia. And I believe from the previous conversations that was also held, and we've heard from Ms. Moremi from the Petrol Fund, that there's adequate capacity created over the past 20 years. And that's really the one thing I want to applaud the government, that we're able to consistently invest in education. If you look at the oil and gas industry and what we've invested over the past few years, we've been supporting engineers and relevant skills without having an oil and gas industry. And that creates a base for actually now building on an applied basis and basically taking those academic skills and saying, how do we propel them and make sure that they actually become applied operators in the industry. But as was also mentioned, local content doesn't exist without financing, and I believe that it is important for public sector pioneered funding, for industry pioneered funding to get into the space of ensuring that we're actually creating the local content operators that are possible.
Thank you. Paul, I'll come back to you to talk about risks. It was alluded to in the previous presentation just before the panel discussion. We all know that financing oil and gas can be quite a high-risk activity. So what are some of the risks that financiers must consider, and more importantly, what are some of the ways they can mitigate these risks or minimize the exposure to these risks?
Yeah, sure. This is a time delay, isn't it? Thanks, Rich. Yeah, so from a risk perspective, I'm going to take a slightly different approach and give you the single best precedent on planet Earth that we see as Standard Bank for developing Namibian oil and gas, and that's the case in Guyana. And for those of you who are not familiar with it. What has happened in Guyana, they found oil in 2015, been producing since 2019, it's up to 600,000 barrels this year, it'll be 1.2 million by 2027. But there's 2 or 3 really interesting aspects to Guyana to reflect on in the Namibian case. The first one is that the development has been very, very fast-track, almost world-class speed. And very significantly, it has carried the support of international NGOs and international organisations for the most part. So just to give you an example, just a few weeks ago, the European Commissioner Timmermans went to Guyana, as did Secretary of State Blinken. So they've very much signed off on the development of fast-track oil and gas in an energy transition environment. Talking of the transition, the Guyanese have had a partnership with Norway again, since 2009 on the rainforests, and 99% of Guyana's rainforest is still intact. And then the third piece that's come up more than once in this conference is the Dutch disease. Dutch disease is not yet present in Guyana. I emphasise not yet present because it's future conditional. But last year the economy grew by 62%, you heard me correct. This year it's down for 35%, next year it's down for 42%. And they're all IMF numbers. And what the Guyanese are doing, they've set up a sovereign wealth fund. It's very transparent. You can get the credit balance on the internet. But they're also starting to do significant infrastructure projects. There's a new bridge over the the Demerara River. There's a bridge over the Corentine to Suriname. There's a road connection to Brazil. And what they're also doing is they're investing in domestic infrastructure, gas to power. For the first time, it's taking out HFO and diesel, and also looking to reduce the cost of cooking gas to Guyanese households. So just to finish off, I'll be totally transparent about this. Standard Bank Namibia and myself, Itembu, could you just put your hand up? Itembu, the team and myself, we went to the Guyana Energy Conference in February this year, and I would encourage a lot of the room to do so. Just to finish off the question though, basically if you follow the global models at the moment, and Guyana is screaming code red as the model to follow, it's pretty much unlikely you'll go too far wrong. You have a precedent out there. Just to give you a silly example, the Guyanese are even looking to tender and build a refinery at the moment. So that's broadly speaking our message. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Esther, I want to build on the previous question I asked you around the role of African banks on the continent. And I'd like you to take us through the role of Afreximbank, specifically in playing in the oil and gas industry. I think your colleague also alluded to you diving into those nitty-gritties that she didn't have time to go through, so this is your chance.
Thank you very much. In terms of the oil and gas sector, like my colleague alluded earlier, today our exposure to oil and gas as Afreximbank is $4 billion US, which is about 80 billion Namibian dollar equivalent. The book has grown. The bank sees opportunity in terms of financing to this sector. The products that we use in terms of financing to oil and gas sector is project finance, where we look at resource-based lending. We also look at how we can get yellow equipment to get the assets to start producing. The bank also works on its project preparation facility, where we have some projects in early stage development which we can then help to get to full production. The bank also extends lines of credit for working capital purposes. That is, once the project is there, sometimes there is need for working capital to get the asset to start producing. So we also offer corporate loans. Our single obligor limit, I must say, is $1 billion US, which is the equivalent of about 20 billion Namibian dollars to a single entity. And as a bank, one of our success stories is the Dangote refinery, which I'm sure you may be aware of in Nigeria, that the bank financed, and which is now able to refine oil in Nigeria. In terms of also other interventions that the bank looks at, we don't only look at offshore developments, we look at how we're going to move this product. So we also look at development of seaports, we also look at development of storage facilities, we also look at how do we introduce local content. The bank actively offers SME lines to get local, to promote locals to participate. A lot was said today about getting the local people to participate. As Afreximbank, we are playing our role in that sector by also encouraging local SMEs to participate in oil and gas through the provision of SME lines of credit. We also offer forfeiting and factoring facilities to the contractors, because a lot of the developments around these projects also involve other contractors doing services, providing services, could be manpower, food, and different things towards the oil sector. So we then come in and we also finance those contractors to ensure that they are able to deliver to their contracts. The bank also offers trade finance lines to the bigger contractors who may not have enough capital in terms of supplying equipment to these projects. We also look at the logistics side, because it's not alone, we need road, we need rail. The bank also provides project finance funding towards the construction of road, rail, movement of those goods, to ensure that we're not only producing, but we are also ensuring that once we produce, we are able to move the goods. The bank also, through its transit guarantee facility, is able to finance easy movement of goods between ports from country to country. For example, today it used to take 21 days to move goods between South Africa and DRC, but through our transit guarantee scheme, today we are able to move goods between South Africa to DRC within 5 days. So these are some of the initiatives that the bank is doing in terms of moving goods. We also look at twinning services. My colleague mentioned that we have opened a Barbados office. One of the things we are doing with Barbados is really to twin also with local African countries. So like Namibia, whatever you are good at, you produce your oil. If there is demand for oil and gas in Barbados, we will facilitate that trade. Those are some of the initiatives that the bank is doing in terms of oil and gas sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther. Quite a mouthful. Ms. Kauna, let's stick to that tangent of SMEs that Ms. Esther alluded to. We know that SMEs are the backbone of any economy, very important contributors to job creation, economic development, and it is of course crucial that we ensure SME participation in the oil and gas industry. In fact, the SMEs were mentioned under the 3rd and 5th strategic objectives of the local content policy, but I want to get into specifics. What are some of the specifics we should be considering when it comes to SME financing or investment incentives in the context of oil and gas, especially bearing in mind that it's a highly specialized and highly capital-intensive industry?
I think what's important to mitigate is the ability of off-takers to provide contracts that make sense, that enable financing. One of the presenters spoke about the risk of awarding work to the lowest bidder, and other presenters spoke about the issue of unemployment. I think we've got a lot of youth unemployment, professionally trained people that don't have meaningful use of their qualification. And that obviously brings a level of desperation in the market. As opportunities open up, people will be forced to bid and to try and secure work. And if we are to develop this industry responsibly and ensure an inclusive development, we have to make sure that off-takers come to the table sensibly and provide the necessary opportunities to create sustainable businesses. I want to connect to what Esther said, and in fact our institution has been having conversation over the past few years, and just assure the Namibian entrepreneurs that the product ranges that are also offered with Afreximbank, and our collaboration is something that we've been working on for a while, are actually offered through BFS, through non-profit. we are able to support local suppliers, be it now at the back of procurement order or working contract, to get access to yellow goods. We have in the industry finance drillers already. Whether it's whatever type of yellow good equipment that is required, we've actually funded that. We've had an exposure of almost $2 billion Namibian dollars in the market, all provided to local SMEs in the market. So in terms of the considerations that need to be made, what's really important is to make sure that the right level of funding is provided to ensure that sustainable businesses are built. So funding need to be channeled, not just from a private capital perspective, but also from a public perspective. And I'm happy to see the Deputy Minister of Mines and Energy, who's very aware of the work that we do as well, in our call to ensure that public sector support comes to the table.
Thank you, Kauna. Fabian, I'll end off with you. Financiers have to bear in mind the increased calls to move away from oil and gas in the context of ESG and sustainability and the drive to net zero. And we've seen some players actually even announce that they are stopping the financing of oil and gas altogether. At the same time, we also have to consider the need for a just transition, especially for African economies. So how should financiers be thinking about ESG in the context of oil and gas funding, given these two aspects that sometimes feel like competing priorities?
Yeah, thank you, Ruusa. I'm actually going to sort of answer this in a perspective of R&B. It's probably going to be the same for other financiers, but this is largely how we set R&B. Firstly, I have to say that we are committed to the development of oil and gas, specifically in Namibia, sort of to the broader African continent. So that's the departure point. To do that, I think it's very important. On previous sessions, people did point out the fact that there are nuances to every country. So to achieve that, I think it's very important that you source and staff yourself with local resources on the ground. Every country has got specific requirements. That's how you solution for what is in front of you. I think that's the second point. And I think touching on the issue around ESG and the transition journey, again, I think, and I listened to the Minister's speech right at the beginning very carefully, and we share his view. I think we think Africa and Namibia should not be denied the opportunity to utilize resources that are available. But whilst doing that, it's very important that we do it in a sustainable way, more importantly in an ESG-friendly framework, and I have to highlight that. So I think to conclude, our view is that we think transition journey can happen in an ESG-friendly manner. I think it's possible to do both.
Thank you, Fabian. And with that, Paul, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I just want to comment largely in agreement with Fabian, that this reflects something of a consensus in the industry. I think that's important from a Namibian point of view. But I just want to make really probably a couple of supplementary comments. The first one is about the drive towards Scope 1 and 2 net zero in oil and gas operations, which is basically about producing the output for the least possible kilograms of CO2 per barrel or barrel of oil equivalent. In Africa, there's already an equivalent, there's already an example of a Scope 1 and 2 net zero project for oil and gas production, which is Panellists in Côte d'Ivoire. The macroeconomic study we wrote for Tanzania LNG with Shell and Equinor, and the government of Tanzania pretty much envisages the same thing for Tanzania LNG. This is a really important point, because to the extent that you're Scope 1 and 2 net zero in your oil and gas operations, you don't actually contribute adversely to the country's NDC objectives. So in the case of Namibia, we would imagine the operators are going to give great thought as to how this issue can be achieved, because clearly the technology is evolving very rapidly, and to the extent you get near scope 1 and 2 net zero, then the challenge and obligation of the transition is faced by the customer along the lines of the polluter pays model. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Fabian? With that, Paul, you have concluded our session for today. Thank you very much to the rest of my panelists for your valuable insights. Thank you to the board.